love the way
Woo!
Mr. Sam does that when he presses the button.
I conducted
He
you.
goes, doo-doo.
I was turning you on.
Oh,
God. What a brilliant start.
oh,
I'd say
fucking
get rid of
hell.
that, but that's great. Right, continue. That's got to stay. That's too good. Apologies,
Oh my
everybody.
God. Oh, well, also some apologies in advance for it's going to be a very sweary episode.
Oh yeah,
If you haven't already picked up on that with the title. So
well, that may have been edited. I don't know what that may have stars and stuff in it. I don't know what I'm allowed to do.
I think people will be able to guess what we're pointing at.
Fill the gaps. The fish button. No, it's not that. It's go on, tell the people what we're doing.
We're talking about the fuck it button today. It's a very important subject. We've all got one. We can all recognize times where we're compelled to press that big button. And I was just saying before we started recording, this came to mind, particularly because of the time of year it is, that all of that getting back into the whatever your routine is, work, school. Well, I suppose people that listen to this movies aren't at school.
Teachers.
But your
teachers.
kid, your teachers. Yeah, I forgot about those folks, those important people. But we kind of have this transition from summer, and hopefully people have all had some kind of rest and relaxation over the summer, and then we head towards the autumn. And we may have had amazing and great intentions for the summer around things like being alcohol free, or in some cases staying away from sugar and ice cream, moderating, those sorts of things. Oh, yeah. Good God. And then something happens in the middle of the summer and we press the big button. And this conversation we were having earlier on, it actually came up on a coaching call recently as well, which was a really, really helpful conversation in the moment and beyond for the people that were involved. So we thought we'd bring a little sprinkle of that here.
Yeah.
So do you want to, for those people that maybe, those unicorns that don't have a fuck it button, do you want to explain what it is, Mr. Sam?
Oh, well, goodness me. Well, it was interesting because, again, I think it's important to let the listeners know what on earth we're on about, because there's different. Actually, that's really interesting. It's a great word. Sorry to anybody who doesn't like the word, because we're going to say it a lot today, but fuck is a great word. It's effectively, you can use it for anything in the English language. You can turn it into adjectives. You can use it for, it describes all sorts of stuff. It's like, it's this really interesting word from a kind of language point of view. But because of that, we need to get clear about what we're talking about, because people use it differently. Like some people, they've got all this weight on their shoulders, they've got all this stress, they've got all these things and all these ways they may have been beating themselves up, and then they're like, oh, do you know what? Fuck it, like whatever. And it all falls down, tumbles out of them, and we get rid of all of that kind of insecure thinking or whatever it is that's been bugging us. And suddenly the snow globe settles and we're back to, oh, I'm okay, like it's all right. So that seems like a very useful tool. And so we wanted to kind of put that out there as something that we've spoken about before. It's really powerful, a way of dropping resistance in the moment. There's even a book all about it. There's a really cool book called, I think it's called Fuck It, The Ultimate Spiritual Way. And it's basically just in that moment, what happens when you just release it, you're just like, whatever. You kind of just you just fall out of a load of thinking and fall back into the present moment, right? Which is super powerful. So there's that, but I think what we're pointing at here in particular is this kind of phenomenon. Oh, goodness me, I was going to say a word. Are you ready? Hang on a minute. Let's try again. Phenomenon. Hey, is that how you say it? It's the I'm not going to try and do it again. I've already, whatever. That word of this thing that appears for people when they're either stopping drinking, moderating, whatever it might be, where we're just like, oh, screw it, whatever. I'm just going to drink. And often I think it can feel like this weird thing, because people often report, I'm sure they do to you as well, mate, that, I was fine for a month and then it just pops up and it's like, well, where did that come from? So yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the different facets of the fuck it button and all the different forms that it may fulfill.
That's a lot of F's.
Yeah. This is gonna break a record for how many times we've sworn in an episode. So yeah, sorry to anyone whose ears are a bit delicate.
Yeah. But even without the effing, there was a lot of F's in your last sentence.
Oh, was there?
Yeah.
As in the oh right. Cool.
You have to go listen back to it.
I
Find
will.
out what you said.
It's like a tongue twister.
Yeah, it was. It was. Did you like a tongue twister as a kid?
Is that a sweet or is that a that's not a
that's
sweet,
the-
is it? I thought it might be some weird sweet from the 80s that I've
the
never
phenomena.
heard of.
Well, there were twister lollies.
Like
Ice lollies.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the pickled pepper? I nearly got there. Balls. Anyway. Okay. This is a great episode. It's all falling apart. Fuck it, whatever. Okay, moving on. So what was the thing before we rock on with what I said I'd love to chat about? You made some really lovely points that I hadn't thought of. So what was the first thing you said earlier? Because I've totally forgotten what it was.
This was the essence of what came up on this coaching call, and it's that there's a difference between letting ourselves off the hook, having grace and compassion for ourselves in a moment. There's a difference between that, letting ourselves off the hook, and self-sabotage. So when the little voice comes a calling that says, oh, yeah, go on, it's all right, then there's a distinction to be made between is that the voice of reason? Is it the voice of reason and love and compassion to self and self-soothing, or is it the more sinister voice of self-sabotage? So I thought that it would be helpful to talk about those two things.
It's kind of, to me, this is kind of paradoxical now that we talk about it. It's really interesting because, you know, we're all doing what makes sense to us with our current level of understanding. So here's the funky thing about it, is that if our level of understanding goes up, our actions may very well will change accordingly, or what makes sense to us will change accordingly. So self-sabotage as a pattern will exist for as long as we think we're, for example, not deserving of a set of circumstances or whatever comes to us in the world of form. So it's interesting to me that even when we say, for example, have that scenario where we can sense we're kind of, we might not use the language self-sabotage, but we can kind of sense that we're like just about to like blow this thing up, and there's like nothing we can kind of do about it. That actually will very likely shift if we get to the root of like what's going on with those behaviors, right? So so that's kind of interesting to me, because I think when we spoke about data points before, and we have spoken about them in previous episodes, but there's this real difference, as you say, between really kind of like doing something that we didn't intend to do, and then kind of like having like a kind of using it as kind of an excuse to drink or whatever it may be. And there's a different flavor to that, and only we're ever going to know. Like, we're the only person that's inside that can figure out like what's going on. But it's paradoxical because whether we end up in that position or not in the first place, I think is a lot to do with bigger picture understanding and where we are in our own personal journey home to the truth of who we are. So yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, but it's a bit of an odd one.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense. I think what people are likely going to recognize is just that feeling, that feeling that comes. And you're bang on in that, because somebody on this call had asked me, like almost like, well, how do I know when I'm just, sort of like kidding myself? They almost wanted me to say whether or not that it was, so this voice that was saying to them, look, it's okay, you can have a drink, see, it's not that bad, in response to somebody else's experience of having a data point. And they almost wanted me to tell them, well, is that voice giving them good information? is that voice directing them in the right way? And what I talked to them about was that that's not my job. My job isn't to direct people towards this is what's good for you or not. This is where your wisdoms are, like that's for you to discern. So when we have the feeling that comes accompanied by the big button, then we can discern what we need at that point in time and what is like where we're being led to. So whether, like I've described this before with clients, that it's like having your own bullshit detector. You put your own bullshit detector on, and when you hear the voice and you get the series of words, it's like, well, you don't, like, it's not a thought out thing, but when you are kidding yourself and when you're perhaps in a different space. So I think that first thing of like having your bullshit detector on and being able to recognize what's coming up and where it's coming from is important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think as well that there are like higher levels of the personal mind as well. So it's totally possible that your subconscious elephant is kicking off and it's talking to you through feelings, through the limbic system, through your emotions, which is primal, which is essentially the outer part of the brain. All the rational decisions and everything, that's what has come later. So when that's online, and so when there's like two of you, it's like there's two of you going on at the same time, and you're fucking kidding yourself. You're like, I'm bullshitting myself, been here before, I know this doesn't work, but I'm what's going on? This is why people talk about being hijacked, right? Because they're like, I've been bloody possessed. I'm like walking back to that place and I don't want to go. Like, why am I doing this? So it's funny that is a time when there's like, that's a really interesting and quite difficult experience to have sometimes, because it can become very, very frustrating. But actually the quickest way out of that is a different kind of fuck it moment, where you're like, look, that didn't make sense to my subconscious, my whole body. That's where I was. Like, I got to let go of that, because at some point, for some reason, for all of us on this journey, that doesn't happen anymore. Like, and it's kind of a bit of a mystery as to when and why and what the insight is, what we see that suddenly means that our level of understanding shifts and we see something different. Because for some people, they can read like one chapter of this Naked Mind and it's like, all right, done, moving on. For other people, myself included in this category, it's really messy. It's really messy. Yeah, I've kind of a little bit lost my train of thought, but yeah, I think
you're talking about the different layers of consciousness.
Well, and I think that's important, because that statement, everyone's doing what makes sense to them at their current level of understanding. I'm not, like we've said before, but it bears repeating again and again and again. We're not talking about an intellectual understanding. We're talking about at the body level, at the limbic system, at every single level of your being, at a spiritual level, at a physical level, every single level. That's what we're pointing at. We're not just talking at like what you understand about alcohol intellectually, because let's be honest, if it was just that simple, no one would be dealing with this button. If you could just go and do an information dump in your mind, well, everyone would be done in about 5. You could go read this Naked Mind or whatever, and you'd be like, right, wicked, done. And me and you would, wouldn't be coaching in this niche anymore. So it's not. So that's not how it goes.
No, it's not. And I think without hijacking this episode, I think here's one for the list. We need to talk about the nervous system, I think, in more detail.
Oh, big time.
The how that mechanism all works, because when you can understand more about the different states and how we move through them more skillfully, then your experience is going to shift and change, and you will I'm not saying that you won't ever become activated. You won't ever find yourself in fight or flight or in freeze. But when you can recognize where you are and what's happening, then and how to not get stuck, things like how to close the stress cycle, then we just become much more skillful at that, traversing from one state to another, because that in a human body with a nervous system, that's us for the rest of our lives. We're all going to be navigating that. And one of the most important things I think that I've done in these last coming up 3 years of being alcohol free is learning how to regulate my nervous system, and being able to like, if I think about, I used to be extremely anxious and extremely stressed. And funnily enough, this morning we had another incident in the Crow household, so trying to get ready for school. So dear Pearl, my eldest one, has a bit of an attitude. Don't know where she gets it from. It's an absolute fucking mystery. So this morning she decides that she's wearing sandals to school. So we're on day 2 of school, and all the kids were bought brand new, lovely shiny school shoes. She got Pokemon bloody school shoes of all things. Cost a bloody fortune and all of that. So yesterday they will go to school in their school shoes. Today, on the first day where it started raining here in the UK after the summer, Pearl decides she's not going in her school shoes because the sun was out first thing. She's going to wear her sandals. And back in the bad old days, that would have caused a serious toing and froing with myself and little Pearl, and I would have got myself in all kinds of upset and agitation about it, and there'd have likely been some shouting and some arguing and some tears and some wrestling of shoes and sandals. And this morning I didn't have that same, like, that hijacking that used to come quite frequently. Didn't have that. And it's interesting where we started this off, because this all typically starts with your thinking, right? So my thought process this morning was, she's just going to get wet feet then, isn't she? So when it pisses down with rain for the majority of the day, she's going to get wet feet, and then she might realize she doesn't like wet feet. So I gave her some information. I'm not a cruel mother that sent her off to school with her sandals on and no information. I said, look, there's 100% chance of rain. Oh no, first of all, I said, it's going to rain for most of the day. She said, it's all right, because when it rains, we have wet play. That's inside, mummy. Okay, I said, lovely. What are you going to do when I pick you up from school? She looks at me, I said, it's going to be 100% chance of rain. Do you know what she said to me?
You're very sure.
Yeah, I looked on the app, right? Do you know what she said? The weather forecast is always wrong, mummy. And so I thought, okay, well, what's the worst that can happen? She walks home and she's got wet feet on the walk home, and then she might not like that, and the next time she might not do that. And then the universe gets involved, doesn't it? So after I've dropped her off at school and made this thing about, so I said to a teacher, yeah, she's got these sandals on, relayed a bit of the conversation, had a bit of a laugh about it with Pearl, I might add. So this wasn't a shaming event. This was just want to let you know she's got her sandals on. Her new school shoes have rubbed a little bit. And I'll bring some. I said to Pearl, would you like me to bring your school shoes in at lunchtime? Which is what I'm going to go and do after this. But then the universe gets involved, doesn't it? And as I'm driving back home, or when I've driven back home and I looked at the weather forecast, it's only not going to fucking rain later.
That's why I said to you, you and your bloody 100%. You can't, it's never, I mean, look, maybe there's some places where it's never 100% anything in this country, is it? Bloody hell.
The point being with this whole story is that those sorts of, like, my day would be punctuated by things like that with the kids, with work, those events that can take you into, with your thinking, can take you into a state of activated fight or flight. And once we're activated, if we're then trying to, and you'll see this play out if you are around, particularly around little people or just around any human being, once somebody is in that state of activation, if you're then trying to use logic and reasoning with somebody, then it's never going to work. You're talking to the wrong part of the brain. So this is where the somatic work that we talk about comes into play, because we need to be talking to the right part of the brain to be able to soothe, calm, regulate, get the other part of the brain back online, which is then when we can get into logic and reasoning.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
So the last thing I would want to say about this is why it's the distinction between self-sabotage and what did I say? It was letting yourself off the hook. It's really important, because we need to effectively learn how to self-soothe and to calm. And so whilst the feeling can be very different in the body, in a state of activation, we need to, I suppose they're quite close bedfellows, and we need to be able to, or it's advantageous to move through the right channels and to be able to pull on the things that are going to be helpful, like really nourishing means of soothing and calming the nervous system, as opposed to, I'll just smash this Toblerone and then I'll feel better, because we might feel better for a short time, but I've eaten enough Toblerones to know that it doesn't last.
Someone said to me the other day on a coaching call in This Naked Mind, what's a Toblerone? Or maybe it was in our group. What's a Toblerone? And I had to explain it. No, it was on because then someone gave like a really good kind of like 3D description of what a Toblerone in all its 3D brilliance was. Yeah, because you keep mentioning it on the podcast, and I'm like, what even is that? And then we had a chat about like,
that was a really bad US accent. Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
That was great. And I got into this conversation about, how in the 80s and the 90s, coming back from an airport with a Toblerone, Ellie's gone. I'm going to let her recover. That deserves snipping. It's going in the highlights.
Just did that.
Yeah.
It was like the worst American accent ever. What came over me?
And it's not, I mean, like, to be fair to you, like, you barely work with anybody from the other side of the pond. You're not really around Americans a lot to be able to give an accurate depiction.
You do yours.
No chance. You're not fucking throwing me in this boat.
Anybody.
No way. That's like, I'm not going into your trap. I think I'm mental. You do one, because
I'm just gonna paddle off on my own.
Yeah, you're done, mate. You keep digging your hole. That's fine. So this is really interesting. So just to like, what the verb that came through was lasso. Just to lasso this podcast onto a clearly like a metaphorical bull, so we don't lose the thread, even though clearly I've lost the thread and Ellie's lost the plot. This is all deeply related to that, to the fuck it button, and it's because, so it's very interesting what you said about thinking, and so the more I kind of learn about how experience is created, the more I find it absolutely mind-boggling that we're not living in a felt experience of the world. We're living in a felt experience of let's call it the power of thought, which is much more than thinking. So you walk into a room, and all this data pours in through your eyes and your ears and your touch and so all of that stuff. And all of your neurological and perceptual systems and biological systems go, oh, I've just got this stream of data. I'm going to make a really good guess at what I think is going on out there. And then it delivers that to you. Now, in that scenario where you're there with Pearl and there are the sandals, you, for whatever reason, the first thing you notice is kind of like a feeling of annoyance and a conscious thought, but actually way, way, way before that conscious thought happened, effectively your limbic system and everything had already kind of created that experience for you. And for someone else, they might have just been like completely just wouldn't have been, it just would have been completely different. They just would not have seen that in that way because they're not experiencing the circumstance, they're experiencing this power of thought. So that's very, very important to know. because when the button appears for us, we may innocently have a quick look at what's going on in the world of our small thinking mind. So we might have a look at this or that, when actually it may be coming from it's most likely coming from a far deeper place of being dysregulated. So get curious, become like a Sherlock Holmes. You're looking for footprints. Why is it that button appears every time you have that meeting with your boss? Why is it that button appears every time you whatever it happens to be, go visit the mother-in-law? Why is it, it doesn't, that's curious, right? Because then the next step is a bit of courage, where often we want to try and come up with any kind of strength practice, to like willpower practice to get us through so we don't click the button, and that may work. And I think there is definite value in learning that it's okay to be dysregulated and to feel uncomfortable, and it won't be like that forever. So that's the kind of like in the moment practice is, you can go back to some of everything we've spoken about on the craving episodes will be really good for that. We cover loads of stuff and the stay stop solution about how to like move through states of dysregulation and bring yourself back. But there's also there's this zoomed out thing as well, which is outside of that moment where all you can think about is, I'm just going to get through this bit, whatever has popped up. Then it's, well, what's going on here? Like, what's dysregulating me? Because what reliably people report to me again and again and again, and it's true in my experience, is that the more we understand how our experience is created, understand where stress is coming from, understand that we're not victims of circumstance, all the things that we've spoken about on the podcast, and we'll continue to do so, the less that button appears. And at some point, it just all but vanishes. So the long-term kind of magic is not in coming up with a bunch of tools and tactics, although they are useful in the moment. It's in raising your level of understanding so that you're better at regulating, like you've said, and that comes from a combination of different things. But just understanding how your experience is being generated inside of you, not from the outside, is incredibly freeing in my experience and with all the people that I work with.
Of course, absolutely it is. And it means that we're not weighted down by either the crap that we've been carrying around in the old karmic backpack, because that we've let that go. We're not accumulating more as we go along because we see how it really is. And we don't need to, we don't have like the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the tension and the stress and the pressure of, right, well, which tactic is going to work in this moment, and will I have access to it? Because so often in the places that we're coaching, people quite rightly want the thing to do. They want the tactic, they want the tool. And you'll hear lots of talk about having a toolbox. And the thing that always makes me smile, not in a vicious way, like not like with Pearl with the shoes this morning, but in a like, it's just interesting, is you can have a fucking amazing toolbox with all the tools in, but if you're not practicing those things, then they're not going to be available to you in the moment. So often people will say, well, I've got all the things in the toolbox, but in the moment I just like, it's like, where's the toolbox? On a van somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. It won't make sense for you to reach for it.
So one of the things that I'm sure I talked about it on that call was, that there are things that are going to be helpful to us as we navigate this world of regulation, things like breath work. But don't wait until you're in an activated state to then remember to use the breathwork technique that you've been taught. So we need to use these things regularly so they become a part of our existence, and we're practicing them in the good moments, in the small moments, in all the moments. So then we have those neural pathways laid down, and we're more likely to be able to access what we need in the moment, with the overall goal, I suppose, of being that we need those things less and less and less and less over time.
Yeah, and what's really cool about that is that a lot of the things that move us from a dysregulated state and help us regulate, when we're regulated and we do those things, they take us into a transcendent state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're like so it's just like a different you're in a different place, and yeah, and like you're experiencing just a different kind of state of consciousness, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like actually the times when those things are most important are the times where they seem least important, because what you're building is kind of like a like a this is a bit of a dance. You know, nothing is necessary, but actually just in learning the power of a deep breath and those kinds of things, and if they're practiced, if it becomes like this kind of muscle movement that you go to it in during those times, you know, that can be a really, really powerful thing. Yeah, I like that's a really, really good point to make. And there's so many different ways of doing it. So it's, again, this is one of those questions where, like, how do I get rid of the fuck it button? The true, once you transcend a lot of the reasons as to why your personal button is appearing, because you've looked into all the different things we've been talking about today, the question kind of disappears with the button itself. So you're no longer looking for an answer to that. So the answer is somewhere in and around, you know, figuring out why it's appearing in the first place, and then going on this journey where you're not just fixated on that, having the courage to look in a different direction. And the same is true generally of the alcohol journey, as it seems to me that most of us know intuitively at a deep level this isn't really about alcohol. Some of us do, like we all wake up to that at different points in the journey. But then, you know, we're very likely to work on the thing that we can see. So it's either the destruction that alcohol may be causing, or this button that we want to keep hitting, or whatever it may be. But actually, the courage to be like, I'm going to look in a different direction, but like sort of beneath the iceberg, because those things are literally the tip of the iceberg. So if you imagine this giant iceberg with a button on top of it, and like it looks as if the button is what exists, but actually that's appearing because of all the reasons, you know, you're either dysregulated, or you're feeling this, or something you're not honoring in your life, or something you're repressing, or something you're pushing down, or a misunderstanding about experience, or feeling like a victim of circumstance. And if you take those things away, the things that you can't really see with, and I mean, that's why it'd be really helpful to get coaching and stuff in these kinds of scenarios, then the button kind of just disappears in its own accord. And the same is true for a lot of the kind of like wonky relationships that we have with food and with things like that. That's definitely been true in my experience. But there's no one journey for anybody. There's no one answer either, really. Like, that's why we go on these kind of have these conversations together, and we so often say, oh, that was interesting. Like, I hadn't really thought about it in that way. And like, yeah, it's reliable that whenever we come up with a topic to talk about, mate, you say a bunch of shit that I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then I'll say some stuff, and then together we'll like come up with something that's a more of a map of the reality of it, because we're coming at it from our two different realities, right?
Yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, the benefits of co-creation. But that, just to join some more dots here, the curiosity bit and the courage, actually, that the precursor to that is compassion. So this whole thing about letting yourself off the hook, where that comes from is the knowledge that we need to have compassion for ourselves. We need to be based in grace and in love, because otherwise all of the other stuff upstream downstream it's not available. Like, you can't access curiosity if you haven't opened your heart to begin with. So this whole thing of like where we started with this idea of, well, when is it that I need to let myself off the hook, and when is it that I'm self-sabotaging? There's something at the core of that needs to be addressed, needs to be paid attention to, because that's the access point to everything else.
Yeah, what was the language that you used right back at the beginning when you were saying, you were describing the difference between, I can't remember exactly what you said. It was like the difference between, you know, compassionately kind of letting yourself off the hook and versus, what was the language you used for
Self-sabotage.
self-sabotage? There was another way we described it. I can't. There's something forming in my mind right now that's it's not fully formed, but I'll have a go. It's like, what makes us think that when we decide to drink, for example, or something like that, or have a data point, and we're kind of we feel like we're kind of we're punishing it. We don't often see it, but often we're punishing ourselves effectively.
Yeah.
We don't see it in that way. We think we're being weak, or we think we're giving up or letting ourselves down, but actually, like, stop for a minute and consider what's really going on. Like, we're doing the best we can, and we innocently end up fucking ourselves up, punishing ourselves, hurting ourselves emotionally, physically, all the rest of it by doing something like that. So of course compassion is going to be a powerful way out of that, because you just use more of the same. You end up just like one side of the seesaw is just weighted down, and you just end up and it kind of doesn't follow logic. And I think it's because we kind of forget that we are doing the best we can with how we see the world right now. And reliably in scientific papers all around the world right now, they're showing again and again and again that actually being kind to yourself and compassionate is how you break the cycle, shame cycle, whatever cycle it may happen to be that you find yourself in. And that, you know, that is courage. That does mean courage then, because if you've got the compassion to be like, wow, maybe that's not the way to do it, just because you've seen a new way doesn't mean that you're just going to do it. You're going to have some courage. It's a little bit like when you know, when you realize, you finally see, right, this job isn't for me. I can't do this anymore. You still need the courage to walk a little bit into the unknown and see what goes, but trust the guidance system, trust the wisdom. But yeah, exactly. Like Ellie said, come from compassion, curiosity, courage. You know, it's interesting to me. It's really affirming actually for all these things to come up again and again, because that's basically what we've built the Stay Stop solution around. That's the fucking it's funny. Yeah. Like yeah.
3 C's.
So yeah, that's funny, powerful. That's cool. Well, like it is funny, but like a lot of it's even that's unknown. You're sort of exploring these new things, and you're like, oh yeah, epic. Like that is actually applicable sort of across the board. And one thing that one of my good mates and one of my mentors, he often says, you know, one thing that he believes, a word that he doesn't hear enough in coaching circles and in spiritual circles, etc., is courage. There's a lot of words about love, etc., and that's really powerful. Of course, that's a wonderful place to be, but ultimately, it does take some courage to sort of do what we know is right by ourselves and by etc., etc. And there's no getting away from that. And it's empowering. It's really, really wonderful. There's something magical about courage. There's something really special about it. You can't fake it. We've spoken about that before. It's like the only thing you can't fake is fate. There's no difference between fake courage and real courage. Like it's this cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got me thinking about that whole thing about your future self. When you're in times of difficulty, when there's something in front of you that you really don't want to do, how helpful it can be to think about. Was I talking about this recently on the podcast, or maybe it was one of the groups? A thing had come up. What was it to do? Oh, it's all the bloody school uniform buying. That's what it was. I didn't want to have to. Oh God, I didn't want to have to do it. It was like this mountain of, in fact, there were two big mountains. The first one was going and buying all the stuff. And the second was ironing all the labels in. And we had like a week or so left of the holidays. And ahead of the first mountain, I did, because I could have just left it all. I could have just kicked it out to the long grass. Thought I'll do that at the end of the holidays. And the second to last week of the holidays, something like that, I decided I was going to go. I was going to, for my future self, I was going to go and climb the first mountain. And because of the way that I approached it, it was a different experience than it otherwise would have been. And I felt, even though I still had the second mountain to climb with the iron, which was Sunday, because of how I planned it and prepared myself, it allowed me to be present for all of the stuff. So it allowed me to be fully present for the rest of my holiday with the kiddos, because I knew I had the intention, the structure around what I was doing. And then even in the midst of going around the bloody shops and then ironing the stuff in, I was fully present for that too. And so it was a different experience than it would have otherwise been. Just, trying to just being reactive. Oh, fuck, I need to get this done. Why did I talk about that? Having one of those moments. Why did I go down that road?
Courage. I love that you've used a really
self.
Yeah. I love that you've used a really just like the kind of thing that's, because it's the same mechanism, like whether you're like literally jumping out of an airplane or ironing a label in someone's fucking top, like it's the same. The mechanics of this stuff is always the same. And I think that's why on coaching calls sometimes get a bit of a shock when people are dealing with really big things. And I'm like, bringing them back to the same things that work for the really small things. It's an impersonal how it works thing.
Yeah.
So I think, so just, this is my little, I thought what would be cool is if I gave my little like bow on it, and then you can give yours and we can see if we're aligned with it. So my bow on this would be like, if we're thinking about like I think the question that most people are like, well, how do I get rid of the fuck it button, right? My answer to that would be, well, if you're in the moment where it's there and you're in the lived experience of it being about, don't have any expectations about how long it's going to be there or whatever, and go and explore ahead of time, go and explore our podcast and other ways, breath work, things you can do to regulate. And we can do more podcasts about that. Come let us know in the group if that's something that you'd like to have. But effectively think about it as a in the moment regulating my central nervous system thing. And so that's one arm of it. But to me, the bigger picture piece is the zooming out piece and getting really, really curious about, well, where is it coming from? Like, what's beneath the iceberg? Is there a pattern at play? And yeah, getting involved in that, and perhaps listening back to this and taking some notes if you haven't, and just sort of considering that bit. And if you're called to it, go and get someone to help you, coach wise or whatever wise, because they can peer over your shoulder and have a little look and suggest, hey, have you considered it? These dots and that dots, and what about this? And it's great to have someone with a different point of view that isn't your point of view in there. So that's how it seems to me. It's a two-pronged approach.
Oh, I love it. Two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Right. My little bow on the end of this is it goes back to that trusting yourself. So right back where I started with the conversation I was having in the coaching call was around like, I'm not going to give you the answer. Everything you need is within. And it was funny because this lady, I love coaching her. She's fantastic. She's very coachable. And she asked a question and she's almost got like that, like look in her eye, she's asking the question. And then when I said like, I'm not going to answer this for you. And the reason why is because you already know the answer. That like wry smile and that look on it, like we know, we know all of this stuff. Not necessarily at a cognitive level, that's not important, but we deeply know this stuff. And so coaching and being around people that are interested in developing the way that you are learning and growing, then it opens up so much, and you'll get to a particular level and think, wow, this is really different to how I used to be. And then a little while later, you've broken to another level. It's like, oh wow, this is really different from, I thought that was good, and this is really different again. And it just keeps going like that. So provided that you have the courage, and you've got the I'm taking it as a given that the compassion, the curiosity is already there. You have that courage and that devotion to your own personal growth, which actually is linked to everybody else. It's spiritual growth. Then it's just this magnificent journey on, where more and more and more is revealed. But at every turn, you strengthen that bond with yourself, that inner knowing, that divine presence within, like that just becomes stronger and stronger, more accessible day after day after day, more present day after day. And that's all you need. That's it.
Nice one, Ellie. Oh, bloody hell, that was loud. Nice one, Ellie Crow. Really led straight into the microphone. Awesome. I like it. Well, I feel like that was a very lovely wrap up. Two nice bows. And I guess it would be about time now, considering how we started this episode, for me to turn you off. Turn us off.
Turn me off. Turn me off. I just before I go, I'd just like to offer a sincere apology to all of our American friends and listeners.
Well, because of the amount of effing and blinding in this episode. Oh no, for your sorry.
Because of that wacky impersonation I did earlier on.
I think they're
going to practice.
I think they're going to. Two things are going to happen. You're going to be forgiven, or you're not. So let's hope it's the prior. It could be the end of the present, and so it could be the end of the present and sober podcast. I'm off to draw up some kind of I don't know, separation, just in case you drop any more bombs.
It's not a bomb. It was a well-intended,
it was great,
badly executed.
I'm pretty sure that there is someone in the whole of America who speaks like that. I mean, let's get real. Out of 380 million people, it's probably someone who has that tone, pitch, accent. Let us know if you know anyone.
Yeah, let us know from which part of the US I most sounded like.
And please rate Ellie's accent out of 10, and come and let us know in the Facebook group what you reckon.
And hopefully it'll appear on some reviews as well.
The actual audio clip, or just
the review of the.
Oh yeah,
incident.
You can go review the episode and review the incident. Right, love you all, team. Bye.